So, welcome to the Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. I'm Ward Simmons. I'm one of your 7 Dharma leaders that rotate responsibility for leading our meetings. So tonight's talk I have entitled, What I've Learned from RVing. So about 6 years ago, Gail, my wife, and I began traveling in an RV. And it's been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot. So Philip Moffitt once said, nothing is outside of the Dhamma. And I find that to be true. So it's not surprising that part of what I've learned while RVing includes Dhamma truths. And tonight I'd like to share a few of those with you. So the first thing I'll share is that RVs are a big collection of electrical and mechanical devices. And that has implications. So they include things we think of as that go with cars, a battery to start it, and an engine, transmission and drivetrain, axles and wheels and tires, lights and a radio, a climate control system, and a display on the dash. So we're kind of familiar with all that. And then they include a bunch of things that we think about for our home. So bathroom fixtures, shower and a toilet and a sink, and kitchen appliances, a refrigerator and an oven and a cooktop, electrical components, lights and switches and plugs and circuit breakers, heating and air conditioning systems and exhaust fans. And then there's this whole other collection of things that are neither house nor car. They're unique to RVs. So there's a water pump when you don't have a water hookup. There's extra different batteries for when you don't have an electricity hookup. Waste tanks when you don't have a sewer hookup. A generator to create electrical power when your batteries aren't adequate. Leveling jacks that stabilize the RV when you're in a campground. An awning or more to create shade. And then often there's, it's either being towed or it is towing a car. And so you've got all that stuff. So now you take all these systems and you add to them the fact that the whole thing, the whole contraption is getting hauled all over the country over some roads that are not very good at highway speeds. And you start to see the magnitude of the challenge. Somebody once referred to an RV as a cheap apartment on wheels. So as you might guess, something is always broken. And when I'm talking to people, I say, don't get an RV unless you want a new hobby. And I'm not talking about the hobby of traveling. I'm talking about the hobby of maintaining. If you don't develop some ability to maintain it, you will, number one, go broke paying other people to maintain it. And number two, you'll never get to use it because it'll always be in the shop. So now, just to be clear, I'm not a plumber and I'm not an electrician and I'm not a mechanic. And I'm really just talking about basic skills to address routine issues, and that's what most of the issues are. So being in a relationship with this fragile, tenuous heap of systems and components has really been instructive for me. Now, one way it's instructive is it can be easy for us to hold a view, unrecognized view, that things should always work correctly. And when they don't, it's just a temporary condition until the functionality can be restored. But that's not really accurate. The normal condition of all things is a state of deterioration and decay. Over time, everything returns to the earth, whether it's clothing, electronic devices, appliances, vehicles, buildings, and yes, creatures, including human bodies, break down and return to the earth. So when any item is functioning correctly, it is the exception to the rule. And you can count on the fact that that is a temporary condition and that it will change. The problem is not that things naturally decay. The problem is the tendency of our minds to misperceive this truth and to live as though everything's reliable when it's not. So as I sat by the side of Interstate 77 in rural South Carolina a little over a year ago, I was suffering. Why did this breakdown of our RV have to happen to me? Why did it have to happen now? And what about all the plans I've made for this trip? And what about my reservations? And why didn't the people who build it better? But 5 minutes before this breakdown happened, I was lost in delusion. I was not thinking this is another temporary moment when it's working correctly. I was lost in the illusion that I could rely on this to always be this way. When my illusion collided with reality, the reality of unreliability, then I had no choice but to shift my view. So does this sound familiar? The idea that everything is inherently unreliable and impermanent is a central tenet of the Dharma. It offers us an alternate way to understand our experience. The constant change around us is the expected, lawful course of events, not an indication that something has gone terribly wrong. The Buddha could have chosen anything he wanted to say as his last words at the time of his death. And certainly he knew that his last words were going to carry great weight. And what he chose to say was, it is the nature of all formations to dissolve. It is the nature of all formed things to deteriorate and break down. So he was pointing us towards something he thought was pretty important. So mechanical challenges come with owning an RV. Now, there's another thing I want to touch on, and it is that RVs require that you deal with a lot of hoses and cords, a whole bunch of coiled up things. For example, there's a hose to supply fresh water to the onboard water tank. And there's a hose to wash the thing off. After a long day of driving, you got to wash the windshield so you can see again tomorrow. And there's a waste hose so you can dump the tanks, the waste tanks. And there's a hose for flushing out those tanks after you dump them. There's a big electrical cord to supply power when you get to the campground so you can run everything. And then there are electrical cords for outside stuff, fans and lights, whatever you want to use outdoors. And if you have cable TV where you're going, there's a cable. So for now, I'll just talk about hoses. So most of us know the frustration of dealing with a garden hose that gets tangled up or kinked up. And for most of my life, my solution was just to pull harder and hope that it would get itself untangled, which it rarely did. And occasionally, my well thought out solution to this problem was to just throw the whole thing across the yard and stomp off. But once it became clear that these coiled up things like hoses were going to be an unavoidable part of my RV experience, I realized I had to find a better way. So a hose, I have learned, has a predisposition, you might say an inclination, as to how it wants to coil up. Now, I don't mean to imply there's any kind of intention on the part of the hose. It's inanimate. But I'm just saying that the physical properties of the material are such that after it's been coiled in a certain position for some time, it naturally resists being positioned in any other way. So I can't just grab the end of the hose and pull and expect it to uncoil smoothly. I have to take an extra moment. I have to observe how it's positioned, and then I have to uncoil it consistent with the way it's coiled up. And once I accepted this and approached my encounters with hoses in this context, everything became much easier. And I can't remember, I'm happy to say I can't remember the last time I threw a hose across the yard. So accepting the way things are has brought me to much more ease in my relationship with coiled up things like hoses. So maybe this sounds familiar. The idea of accepting what's true rather than struggling against it. It's not demanding things be other than the way they are. And in essence, it is the teaching of non-attachment, which is at the core of the Four Noble Truths. When we attach to how we want something to be, we set ourselves up to suffer. The stronger the attachment, the greater our suffering. And conversely, the less attached we are, and the more we are willing to just accept the truth of the situation, the more at ease we'll be. When we misperceive that attachment will bring us satisfaction, then we suffer. And to whatever extent we can disengage from the trap of attachment, that is the extent to which we'll have relief. Now, another RV experience that has been instructive for me is it involves camping in campgrounds. And campgrounds are imperfect. As campers, we want solitude. We want spaciousness. We want to be surrounded by nature. And so we go out to national parks and state parks. But then we get there and the roads are lousy and we don't have any electric or water hookups. And so then we go to a private campground where you've got all those amenities. But now they put us cheek to jowl beside each other where we don't have any privacy. Or they put us right next to the playground that's noisy. So making camping reservations is a constant, diluted search for the perfect campsite. And when we finally reconcile ourselves to whatever level of compromise we have with the site that we've ended up with, we settle in, and then there are our neighbors. So several weeks ago, we were camping outside of Charleston. And if our neighbors from outside of Charleston are listening, then deepest bow of apology for using this example. But everything was fine until this truck pulled in, pulling a big, beautiful Airstream trailer. And you may be familiar with these. They're very retro looking in appearance, and they've got shiny aluminum outsides. They kind of look like an airplane. And the owners proceeded to spread out all their stuff on their site. They had upholstered furniture and end tables and rugs and lamps, and it looked like they were having a yard sale. Well, now I'm used to this. You know, everybody does camping differently, and I'm a live and let live kind of person. But then at dark, they turned on all the lights on the lawn they had created, lamps and everything. And then they turned on all their lights on the trailer. So think about a big truck, a tractor trailer truck with all those amber and red lights up at the top and on the sides and the corners and the bottom. And they turned them all on. And then they left them on all night. And it looked like a Christmas tree, and it was directly across from our campsite. Now, some campgrounds prohibit leaving your lights on, your outside lights on all night, but this one did not prohibit it. But it's still kind of recognized camping etiquette that you don't do that. We camp to be closer to nature. And a campground full of lights really isn't very conducive to that. I read an article last week. It was entitled "The 7 Deadly Sins of RV Camping." And along with dumping your waste tanks out on the ground and letting your dogs run through other people's campsites, right there it was, leaving your outside lights on all night. It's one of the 7 deadly sins. So every situation like this has at least 2 valid ways to look at it. First, objectively speaking, the question is what the other person is doing acceptable? Does it violate any rules or any accepted norms? And that's a useful question. And I'm not saying we put it aside, but that's not where we want to get stuck, because the second question is much more fertile ground for us as Dharma practitioners. And the second question is, what is my relationship to this situation? And this question is equally useful whether the first question, whether the answer is no matter what it is. If what is going on is clearly unacceptable, this second question is still very useful, because we're not looking at the behavior, we're looking at our relationship to the behavior. So I looked across the way at this Disney-like display, and the stories in my mind started raging. You know, don't they know this is rude? And they're putting their wishes ahead of everybody else in the campground. And why doesn't the campground do something about it? And I wonder if I could sneak over there and pull the plug out after they go to bed. And what if they have a dash cam pointing over there and they record me doing that, and then I'll get in trouble? And it just went on and on. And all of this was because I was holding a view of myself as somebody who was entitled to a different experience from what I was having. So in the context of the Dhamma, I was lost in a strongly held self-view, and it was a view that was rigid and unyielding. So you may be familiar with this feeling. It's one of self-righteousness or indignation or being violated. And you'll sometimes hear this referred to not as a thing, but as a process. The verb is selfing, creating a sense of self around a situation. And when we have these fixed sense of self, this fixed sense of self, it's never a good indicator. It's never a good sign. A more correct understanding is that there is no single fixed immutable self, but it's this constant flow, this arising and passing of selves that we create under different circumstances. And the real question is, what is the skillful self to utilize in this situation? I was not doing that so well. But as I basked in the glow of our neighbor's outdoor lights, I saw that my unhappiness was resulting from this. And I was able to entertain some other possibilities. Maybe I could be more generous in my approach. Maybe that would yield a better result. It wouldn't change the lights that were across the way, but it might change my experience of the lights. So a less strongly held view, or even better, a different view, would result in less suffering, and so it did. Now, if you've been studying and practicing the Dharma for some time, you may recognize the three experiences that I've described: mechanical failures, coiled up things like hoses, and campground neighbors. You may recognize those. They're included in a teaching known as the three characteristics of existence, or the three marks of existence. The understanding of unreliability or impermanence, like with electronic and mechanical systems. Is the first characteristic. The understanding of the connection between attachment and suffering, for example, how to work with coiled up things, is the second characteristic. And the third is the understanding of selflessness or not self. For example, our relationship to difficult neighbors. So as a community, we at IMC Charlotte teach and practice insight meditation. But the path to awakening is more than meditation. It also includes ethical behavior, which forms the foundation for and supports meditation practice. And it also includes wisdom or insight, which is supported by and arises from our meditation practice. So ethical behavior, meditation practice, and wisdom or insight, these three key components. Cultivating an awareness of the three characteristics of existence is a key step on the path to awakening. It is what we are preparing our minds for when we train in meditation. It is the fruit of the practice. Sometimes we hear somebody relate a story of a profound, life-changing experience where they were instantly changed. But this is not how insight works for most of us. For most of us, it is a slow, steady process, often with 2 steps forward and 1 step back. For most of us, it is an evolution, not a revolution. And cultivating awareness of the 3 characteristics is no different. It comes gradually, over time, and almost imperceptibly. One day, you're broken down on the side of the road, and you see that your expectations about reliability of machines were completely wrong all along. One day, you're trying to get your water hose rolled up, and suddenly you see that you're struggling against the way things are. One day you see the problem is not your neighbor's outside lights, it's your expectations of your neighbor. Over time, we incline toward awakening, and each small step reduces our suffering and increases our happiness. I'll close with a favorite passage of mine from Bhikkhu Bodhi. This path is a matter of gradual practice and gradual progress without expecting quick results. For some, progress may be rapid. For others, it may be slow. But the rate at which progress occurs should not be cause for elation or discouragement. Liberation is the inevitable fruit of the path and is bound to blossom forth when there is steady and persistent practice. The only requirements for reaching the final goal are two: to start and to continue. If these requirements are met, there is no doubt the goal will be attained. So I'll offer that for your consideration. Now we have some time if anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment. See, there's some things in the chat box. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can use your electronic Zoom hand and raise your hand, or you can chat it in the chat box. And I will go ahead while we're waiting to see if anyone has anything to say and address announcements for tonight. So all of the items I'm going to mention are on the website, imccharlotte.org. Our Tuesday noontime sits have resumed on Zoom, and there's a link on the website. The book discussion group is underway, and you can contact Joy if you're interested. Her email is on the website under the Dharma Leaders. On July 21st, we will have a guest leader, and we will start not at 7:30, but at 7 o'clock. And her name is Tweri Sala. She's from Seattle, and she's quite a good speaker. And I think it's going to be a really special event. And I would suggest that you put it on your calendar and make it a point to be present if you can. The summer residential retreat, which will be held August 19th through 22nd, registration is open, and you can do that on the website. The first Wednesday of each month, which is coming up, I guess, 2 weeks from now, is the practice discussion session on Zoom, where people with an established practice can have some time, more one-on-one time with a teacher. And also the last Wednesday of each month, which I think will be a week from now, there is a live Zoom instruction session that begins at 6:45. We're grateful to everybody who volunteers for the Sangha. It's much, much more than you could imagine from what you see on the screen tonight. And if you would like to support this community financially, there is a link on the website for donations. So here's a question. How would you respond to someone insulting you, saying you have no morality because of your beliefs or lack of beliefs? Well, I'm going to answer two things. How would I respond? That depends on the day. Some days I respond better than others, but I'm going to answer the related question, which is how might one respond? And I would say, first and foremost, it helps me to remember that my experience is not controlled by what somebody else does or says. So the fact that somebody is insulting me or believes have no morality, that statistically it's a bell curve. A certain number of people in the world are going to believe that about me. And this is not new information. And so the real question is, if I am clear about my ethical standards, then I don't expect everybody to share those. And I think the way to skillfully navigate that moment is to take a deep breath, to realize that somebody who would do or say that is suffering greatly. They're searching, they're like a heat-seeking missile, searching for somebody to criticize. And the best response I can have is to feel metta for them, feel compassion for them, feel loving kindness, and hope that their suffering decreases or ends soon. So that's easy to say. I don't always get it right, but that's the suggestion I would make. I should have said this during the announcements, but they have now been posted in the chat box. So okay, well, fair enough. So why don't we move to our closing loving kindness or metta practice. So if you will find a comfortable posture for a few more minutes of meditation. And before we begin, let's just bring to mind any being or beings that you would like to hold in loving kindness during this practice. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a pet, maybe it's a population of a country or a state or a city. Maybe visualize this being or beings and just say their name to yourself. So we'll start with metta toward ourselves. I'll offer some phrases that you can repeat silently to yourself. May I be free from inner and outer harm. May I be happy and content. May I be healthy in body and mind. And may I live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And then directing our loving kindness, our metta practice to another being or beings. And we'll include here all the people, even though we haven't heard their names, all the people who were identified a few minutes ago when I asked you to do that. May you be safe from inner and outer harm. May you be happy and content. May you be healthy in body and mind. And may you live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And finally, broadening our metta practice out to incorporate all beings everywhere. May all beings be safe from inner and outer harm. May all beings be happy and content. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. And may all beings, without exception, live lives of well-being, free from suffering. And may no beings RV break down.